So, what does it mean when a former prime minister leaves the country they once led? It's a story that sparked a lot of conversation, for sure. Today, we're going to break down the facts behind Jacinda Ardern's move to Australia, calmly, clearly, and using the data.
Now, this detailed analysis is brought to you by Webfit News, and our whole approach here is to examine this story using verified data, migration statistics, and real economic context. We're not interested in speculation, we're just here for the facts. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll establish the verified baseline, what we actually know for a fact. Then we'll zoom out and look at the hard data on migration and economics. After that, we'll see how this fits into global patterns for former leaders, look at the perception versus reality, and finally, dig into why this story really hits a nerve for so many people.
Okay, first things first. Before we get into any analysis, let's just lay out what has actually been confirmed. We have to separate the solid facts from all the noise and fiction that's been flying around.
The timeline itself is pretty straightforward. Jacinda Ardern resigned as prime minister back in January of 2023. A few months later, she accepted fellowships at Harvard and started some global advocacy work. And then more recently, it's been confirmed that she's spending extended time over in Australia with her family. That right there, that's the established sequence of events.
Now, this next part is maybe the most important. What is not verified? There's been no official statement saying this is a permanent move. There's zero evidence of any kind of political comeback plan. And to be perfectly clear, there's absolutely no credible proof of a political exile or that she was somehow forced out. This is our verified baseline.
All right, so now that we have the facts straight, let's zoom out a bit. One person's decision doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's happening inside a much bigger picture of migration and economics, and the data is what really gives us that context. Which leads to this crucial question, right? Why has the relocation of one person managed to tap into such a huge national conversation about the state of New Zealand? Well, the data offers some pretty important clues. So when you look at this chart, you're actually seeing two stories at once. While New Zealand has had record net migration gains overall, you can also see this really consistent flow of departures. For years now, Australia has been the #1 destination for New Zealand citizens who decide to move. We're talking about thousands of Kiwis making that move across the Tasman every single year.
So, what's the pull? Well, a huge part of it is economic. It's pretty simple, really. As you can see here, median full-time earnings in Australia are significantly higher than in New Zealand. And when you pair that with an economy that's backed by a population about 5 times larger, well, the structural appeal becomes really clear.
And of course, we can't ignore the pressures back home. During that recent economic cycle, New Zealand's annual inflation hit a peak of 7.3%. You combine that with high mortgage rates, and it put a serious squeeze on households. This is the financial reality a lot of Kiwis have been dealing with.
And just as a quick reminder, this independent analysis you're watching is produced by Webfit News. Our focus is, and always will be, on transparency and data integrity. We just don't publish unverified claims.
Okay, let's add another really important layer of context here. How does Jacinda Ardern's life after being prime minister compare to what other former world leaders do? Is this move an outlier, or does it actually fit a pretty common pattern? Well, when you look at it, her choices fit a very well-established pattern. It's really common for former world leaders to join international boards, take on academic roles like her fellowships at Harvard, pursue global advocacy work, and yeah, sometimes they relocate, either for a little while or for good. It's a pretty common path.
And it's really worth coming back to her own words from her resignation. She was so clear about why she was stepping down. Burnout. She said, "I no longer have enough in the tank." Leading a country through multiple crises is unbelievably demanding, and that personal factor is a key piece of the puzzle here. So, maybe the best way to frame all this is to think of New Zealand and Australia as two deeply connected labor markets, with a totally open bridge between them. People moving across that bridge doesn't automatically mean there's a crisis. More often than not, it just signals a simple economic comparison. This brings us to probably the most sensitive part of this whole discussion: perception versus reality. We need to look directly at the narratives that have really taken hold online and see how they stack up against the actual facts we've laid out. Let's just put it side by side. The narrative that she abandoned the country? Well, that's countered by the simple fact that she resigned voluntarily. The claim she was pushed out? There's just no credible proof of that. And the idea that she left because the country is in decline, that ignores the reality that her move aligns perfectly with economic trends and global post-leadership norms. So, if the facts are actually pretty straightforward,
Why has this story triggered such an intense and powerful public reaction? To understand that, we have to explore the symbolism and the public psychology that are at play.
It really comes down to this core question. Why does the personal decision of one former leader become a sort of mirror for widespread public anxiety and concern? Because this is about way more than just one person.
There are a few big psychological factors going on here. First, a leader's move is always highly symbolic. It can make people think, do they know something we don't? That feeling then plugs directly into existing anxieties. Real concerns about the cost of living, the brain drain to Australia, and a general erosion of trust. And then, of course, social media just pours gasoline on that fire, amplifying everything.
And that's exactly why our approach in this entire analysis has been guided by 3 simple principles. We choose transparency over speculation, we choose data over rumor, and we choose context over outrage, every time.
So, to wrap up our findings, Jacinda Ardern's move to Australia lines up with long-standing migration patterns between the two countries and the normal career paths of former world leaders. There is simply no verified evidence to back up any claims of a systemic exile or a forced displacement.
And really, that leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The real story here isn't the move itself, it's how we interpret it. So the bigger question for all of us is, how do we make sure our own interpretations are anchored in verifiable facts, and not just in our feelings or our fears?
This in-depth analysis was produced by Webfit News. If you value this kind of transparent, data-driven journalism that really tries to cut through the noise, then please follow us for more, because at the end of the day, clarity is